Hello, and welcome to this Saturday edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. You know, a few days before the U.S. presidential election, you know, you see me out early in the morning on the mall capturing the serenity and tranquility of life. And a peace came over me. There was no wind. It was just so peaceful. And I said to myself, and as I reported to you, that whomever wins on election day, it will be a mandate, it will be a landslide, and there will be no delay in the results. Americans will know, and we can unify and heal. Well, this is a fact. Donald J. Trump is the 47th president of these United States, and the GOP controls the House and the Senate. But this election wasn't just a win for Trump. It was truly a reckoning. It was a landslide. It tells you that the American people are awakened, not manipulated by the press, not manipulated by public opinion. And he won the popular vote. This election means more to Trump and Republicans than any race in recent memory. You know, some people can say that Trump has been unjustly politically prosecuted by his political enemies, but you can say he's prosecuted his enemies and been unjust to them. Everyone has a story to tell, but I will tell you this. There are many things that he was blamed for, the problems of this past Biden and Harris administration. But despite the fact that he wasn't in office and held no elected position, but has been fighting for his life for the past 4 years. Some would say they prosecuted him. I would say they elevated him. I would say the prosecutions are the reason why he's president today. But he fought back with a level of fervor that most courageous leaders would. He took what they did as the pile on, and he made himself a martyr. And he became the victim that the American people decided to defend. And he won. And we welcome you to this edition. I know people are in a state of shock. I saw Jimmy Kimmel with those fake tears crying. People are in such denial about elections. But you know, when it's all said and done, we unify behind the victor. Let me welcome my guests to the show. Virginia Allen, senior news producer for the Daily Signal and host of the Daily Signal podcast. Louis Martinez, Washington correspondent for the NTD. They join us in the studio. You know, Louis, let me start with you. They said after the Trump rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City that Latino voters were offended. It will nosedive the Trump campaign. But I got to tell you, the election results told a different story.
I think that there's a mistake with legacy media when they talk about Hispanic voters, because Hispanic voters, if you look at the electorate right now, 60% of them are under the age of 50. So these are third, fourth generation Hispanics. They don't necessarily identify with the identity of being Hispanic. They're Americans, so they identify with their wallets, with their livelihoods. So yeah, we saw double-digit gains for Trump with Hispanic voters, but with every other segment of the population. So I think if we learn something is that identity politics does not affect the outcome of elections anymore. I think Democrats will have to rethink their strategy going forward, because their message was centered for the past 2 decades on identity politics, on minority groups, and turns out that that's not a message that connects with voters. It doesn't mobilize them. People came out to vote, they just didn't vote for the Harris-Walz ticket.
You know, according to Bernie Sanders, Democrats abandoned the working class. So why should they have been surprised on election day and early voting that the working class abandoned the Democratic Party, Virginia?
They should not have been surprised, and hopefully, moving forward, they'll learn a lesson from this. I think there's a big takeaway, as Luis was saying, that it's been so focused, and almost I think the Democrats have been a little cocky. They've thought, oh, well, we can guarantee that we'll get the majority of the female vote. We can guarantee we'll get the majority of the black vote. We can guarantee we'll get the majority of the Hispanic vote. Turns out you cannot bet on those things. And I think at the end of the day, there's so many factors we can talk about, moving factors that contributed to the results of this election. At the end of the day, the biggest one, it all comes back to the economy. Every single American, no matter your sex, no matter your race, no matter where your parents are from, we have all felt that economic strain. And that, I think at the end of the day, was the determining factor that really motivated people that maybe had never voted before to get out to the polls and vote, and to think back to 4 years ago and say, yeah, I was definitely better off 4 years ago, so I'm going to go with the candidate that has proven he knows how to handle our economy.
I want to throw out a stat in this recent presidential election. The battleground states, the blue wall. Louis, Vice President Harris did not win one battleground state. White Vice President Harris and her team, not only they got to the blue wall, but it crashed on them. I mean, it just crashed. Not one battleground state.
Even worse, in the states of Michigan and Wisconsin, the senatorial Democratic candidate outperformed Harris. So, like, the voters in those states actually decided, you know what, I don't like Harris, but I'm still going to go for a Democratic senatorial candidate and Trump for president. So, yeah, they lost the entire blue wall. It also shows polls, that's the third cycle in a row that they undercount Trump voters. So, you know, third's a strike. We shouldn't necessarily the way that they're polling people is not working. They're undercounting Trump voters. The blue wall fell. Also, maybe the choice of vice president was not the best choice for the Harris campaign, now that Pennsylvania was that crucial and critical state, and Governor Josh Shapiro was not picked. So I think the ticket splitting right there in Arizona and Wisconsin is really interesting. And if we go back to the polling, even in Arizona, the margins that we're seeing in between Kari Lake and Ruben Gallego are way closer than what the polls indicated. And that, to me, continues to surprise me 3 cycles in a row. Is this intentional? Is this coordinated? Is this, like, you know, statistical mistakes that, you know, we don't have the minds to actually have pollings to account for those people who don't want to maybe publicly say that they're supporting Trump?
Now, some people may look at me and perceive that I have joy. I do have joy. I have joy because I respect the will of the people. When Joe Biden won the presidency 4 years ago, immediately I said, Joe Biden is my president. I didn't get caught up in some fraudulent voters and narrative that Trump was pushing. Joe Biden became my president. But I must say, Virginia, I must say, because I'm happy, there will be no lawyering up.
I think we're all happy about that.
delays, lawyers getting paid. It is settled, it is. But, Virginia, Miss Allen, Donald Trump won the electoral vote, but the popular vote. And you know what happens when you win the popular vote? That really lessens your chance of having a legal strategy.
It sure does.
Yes.
It's been since 2004, since George W. Bush, that we have seen a Republican win the popular vote. I mean, this is huge, it's significant, and it goes right back to the fact that the American people had, I think, a really unique advantage. I've maybe even mentioned this on your show before, but we kind of knew both candidates really clearly what we were getting, of course, because Donald Trump's already been president, so the American people could look at, all right, I know what I'm getting with him, and Harris has been vice president for 3.5, almost 4 years, and so the American people knew, okay, I'll vote for her, pretty sure I know what I'm getting, and because she went on The View, and when asked, what would you do differently, she said, nothing comes to mind, and then later added, well, I would have a Republican in my cabinet, which everybody knew would be someone like Liz Cheney and wouldn't really be a true Republican. So people kind of thought, all right, I get to pick between the last 4 years or, you know, what we had during a Trump administration, and obviously the American people want what they had under a Trump administration. And when I was out in the field talking to voters, I went to North Carolina.
You were at Mar-a-Lago.
I was at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
Well, so they had it at the convention center just down the street from Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach on Tuesday night. And both there and leading up to the election, you know, when I talked to voters, I consistently heard two things. They were saying that they really liked Trump's honesty. They liked the fact that you get what you get with him, right? Maybe they don't love what he says all the time, but he's real, and people like that. And then you throw on the policies that most conservatives really like, that, you know, he runs with. And even if people say, well, there's a couple I'm not a fan of, for the most part, they said, all right, well, maybe I can swallow something that I don't love for this list of 5 things that I do love. And usually at the top of the list for conservatives was border and immigration, wanting to secure the border, stronger economic policies, no tax on tips, getting gas prices down, those kinds of things. And then a third thing that I pretty consistently heard was people really appreciate what he's done for the pro-life movement. Even though some of his statements of late have not been as strong on the pro-life front, they are looking at history and saying, well, he has done a lot to protect life, and much rather have a president who has protected life previously than someone who is so opposed to protecting life in the womb.
You know, Virginia mentioned Liz Cheney. Let me give some respect to Liz Cheney, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and the Vice President of the United States, who asked their base of voters to rally behind President Trump. Their loyalty is not to a party or to an individual, but is to the Constitution. And the example that we set for the rest of the world after our elections are over and on January 20th is the transition of power. And I was so proud because I know they were hurt. I saw the tears from former Speaker Pelosi, but yet they were able to rise up. And former Secretary of State and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, who also said she wished the president success. That is who we are and define who we are as Americans. I was so heartwarming. It was so heartwarming hear them stand firm and make it clear to their voters. Today, we unify as Americans under one Constitution. And we'll be back. Andrew Donaldson from Young Voices is joining us now. Andrew, welcome to the show. And which demographic groups showed the largest shifts in voting patterns in this election cycle?
2 of them, but the first one that's going to get the headline is, of course, working class and middle class Hispanics, and then, of course, the white working class also. But the Hispanic vote's the one that's really going to get the headlines for a lot of this. It's already been covered a little bit. Places people don't really think about, places like Hazleton, Pennsylvania, places where there's big in-groups of Hispanics that have really, really grown. They're working class, they're middle class, they're creeping into the upper classes, and they're starting to break more and more Republican. It's really funny, if you go back and look, kind of the core group that Donald Trump hollowed out of the old coalition of the Democratic Party was what we used to call blue dog Democrats, right? They're kind of socially conservative. They're open to government programs and that sort of stuff, maybe a little more fiscal liberal than the normal right-wing GOP would be. But the Blue Dog Democrat used to be the kind of the core of the old Democratic coalition. And those are the people Donald Trump really flipped red from the Democrats back in 2016. And now he's done it again in this election. And a lot of those folks in a lot of these places turned out to be working class Hispanics. Look at places like the Rio Grande Valley that have now gone completely red. Those are those folks that have turned these elections, and the demographic of Hispanics is not only growing, it's diversifying, it's also politically diversifying, and that's something that's going to really have to be studied. The Democratic Party always assumed they were going to get their votes. They are not. They are proving to be really strong for Trump, and he's gaining, and this is going to be a trend that's going to continue if the Democratic Party doesn't figure out a way to talk to those people in a more meaningful way than they have up to this point.
I think this has less to do with Trump himself and more to do where people's values are. I think the demographic that showed the strong vote among black men, the strong vote among Latinos, and just let's call it what it is. 52% of women voted for Donald Trump. There is no gender gap. But then you have to ask yourself, because we like to try to connect everything to some personality. Listen, what do these three demographics have in common? Parents don't want to fight with their young kids in the classroom dealing with gender-affirming issues. Parents don't want to deal with having their child in the same bathroom who's a transgender. Parents who work hard to raise their daughters in sports and athletics, and they work and make sacrifices, and when it's time for the championships, they don't want their child, their daughter, competing against a biological male. Parents are tired of the education results in this country. We forget family values, these traditional values, belief in God, church on Sunday, be good to our neighbors, love each other, still matters to people. And if Donald Trump were not embracing these policies as a candidate, the vote may be different. Now, the question I ask of you, Louis, is whether or not the Democrats are so bent on changing the face of America that no matter what the data says to them, they're not going to change.
You know, throughout the campaign season, I kept on hearing, you know, legacy media talk about the black vote and the Hispanic vote. And I questioned whether that was racist in itself, being Hispanic. I was like, that, you know, being Hispanic it's not a one umbrella that defines who I am or what my voting preferences look like. So I think that's a huge mistake thinking that these groups are monolithic. And if there's something to be learned, and I hope the Democratic Party learns it in the postmortem from all the exit polls, is that the American electorate is much more complex than this binaries of abortion or pro-life, or if you support transgender issues or not. Like if you go to Florida, for example, went red for Trump, but then voted 57% for enshrining abortion rights in the state. Didn't pass the ballot measure, but that means that there's a complexity where they're picking different things.
And so, listen, he won Miami-Dade for the first time since 1988.
So I think there's a complexity that the Democratic Party is missing out, and that's where the Republicans and specifically Trump's MAGA movement has cashed in. Because if you look at the coalition, it's incredibly diverse, but the message is very centralized on the economy. So like, if you want to talk about populism, yeah, it's a diverse group of people under one message, but the message, it's at least the economy. It's not about an enemy, as opposed to the message that Democrats have been pushing for the past couple of decades, where there's the bad guy, right? There's the boogeyman of like white supremacy or the threat to democracy or people who want to take away your rights. So I think that the narrative has to change if Democrats want to correct the course for the next election cycle. Also, we need to bear in mind that Trump will have this control of Washington most likely for 2 years, right? Because then we have the midterm elections, and we know that that's going to be an election cycle against a Trump administration and what it has accomplished. So Republicans also have 2 years to deliver on all the promises if they want to keep control of Washington. Otherwise, we're going to see this back and forth that doesn't really lead to good governance.
Well, I got to tell you something. You took me someplace I wanted to go later in the broadcast, Virginia and Andrew, and that is what people normally advocate during a campaign is not how they govern once they're sworn in the office. And I think the question for this hour among you, the realities of the promises that Donald Trump made, ending the conflict in Ukraine, the conflict in Gaza, Americans will realize prosperity immediately. We're going to get the illegals out of this country. How, in terms of his policy, as a governing president, how realistic is it for Americans to see results immediately?
Temper expectations. I think At the same time, we know that Trump's not going to be afraid to use the bully pulpit. We know he's not going to be afraid to sign a slew of executive orders literally on day one. Those border policies that he had in place during his previous administration, those are going back in place on day one through executive order, make no doubt. The deportation promise to launch the largest mass deportation in history of illegal aliens, that's something that he has a whole team of people that are very, very committed to. We're talking about Tom Homan, Mark Morgan. I mean, these are guys that served previously in ICE, in Customs and Border Protection.
But forget about the guys who served. Think about the cost and the resources, and think about the fact it doesn't stop the other problems that have been created by this border crisis as you try to deport them out. You're talking about a lot of people.
You're talking about a lot of people.
A lot of money.
Well, and I've asked Mark Morgan, the former acting commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, I was like, how are you going to do this? And he kind of jokingly was like, well, one at a time. And there's a level where it's like, that's not entirely true, but there's a level where that's accurate. It's going to take time. It's going to have to be a very strategic process. But at the same time, it's going to be a long, long road ahead. We're talking 10+ million people, 10 million at least. I think that the strategy is going to be to start with the most dangerous, to start with the criminals, to start with the known folks on the terrorist watch list. Those are going to be prioritized. Now, when it comes to other issues, there's certain things that we know Congress has to do, and Trump can apply a lot of pressure. At the end of the day,
I'm going to stop you again.
Yeah.
Here's his issue. He can't blame it on the Democrat House and the Senate anymore.
Nope,
because he has control.
He has control.
So how does he use? But still people see it as control.
Yep.
They gave Trump what he wanted. They
Yep.
gave the GOP what they wanted. And sometimes when you get what you want, it becomes even more difficult because the minority knows how to fight and block the majority from successes.
Yeah, that's true. And I think there will be many battles. I will say, however, it's going to be easier than it was in 2016. In 2016, the Trump administration, they didn't have their ducks in a row. Honestly, I think everyone was surprised, including the Trump
learning
campaign
curve from
himself.
him being president.
The learning curve.
Okay.
Yeah, so he
That's
has
fair.
some experience.
Okay.
He has more ducks in a row. He has a strong transition team. They're going to be ready to go on day one. It remains to be seen. I mean, it's only going to take a handful of Republican members, either in the House or the Senate, who say, I don't really want to play your game, to make life very difficult for Republicans.
You know, let's be clear, Andrew. These Republicans who are now unified supporting Donald Trump, they don't like this guy. It's just a fact. They tolerate him. And there is a difference. And sometimes he can be very brash and all-knowing, and sometimes very dictatorial. These are people who are elected in their own right. It is important that in terms of Donald Trump's being magnanimous, which he has not shown a lot of, Donald Trump needs to build allies in Congress, okay? Donald Trump needs to show deference towards his allies. And at the same time, there are so many people, young people, women, that voted for him not because of, but in spite of the media, in spite of the propaganda. So he has a place where he can really not only hold them, but bring in more people who said, well, I just did not come in. I was able to heal and unify this nation. How do you do all this at the same time? And people want it quickly. They want the microwave mentality. They don't want to wait. How does he do all this? And we have not even started talking about the foreign policy front.
No, foreign policy is going to be a huge problem, but let's start with the immediate problem he has, which is almost everything you just clicked off that he promised is going to have to go through Congress. Now, we know during his first term in 2016, 2017, they managed to get through the tax cut, the big tax cut, and a few other things, but that's about it. The history of recent presidencies is when you come in with the trifecta, and we're still waiting to see the shape of the House because we've got to wait on all those California races. So it's going to be 4 seats, 7 seats, 8 seats, 5 seats. That matters because, you know, does the Freedom Caucus have enough to kind of gum up the works? Does another group have enough to gum up the works? So this stuff all has to go through Congress, and you usually get one big piece of legislation and maybe 1 or 2 others with your trifecta, and then you get into the midterm seasons, which usually goes against the incumbent. And we just have to be honest about this. Donald Trump is coming in as an immediate lame duck president, so he's going to have an even shorter leash. There's one other part of this that you've got to concern yourself with, too. The leadership in the House and the Senate. Mitch McConnell's not there anymore, and I know a lot of the Trump people maligned him, but a lot of Trump's top-level stuff that he likes to trumpet he got done, Mitch McConnell shoved a lot of that stuff through. He's not there. There's going to be new leadership in the Senate. Even if it's good leadership, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve and a turnover there. and Speaker Johnson's going to be back in charge of the House now, it looks like. And they just did not have a record of really being super competent and super getting stuff through the last, and they just can't blame all the Democrats either. They had trouble getting their own caucus in line. So they're going to have to sit down with those three key players, whoever the Senate leader is going to be, the Speaker of the House, and Donald Trump, and all the staff, and they're going to have to get on the same page. They're going to have to do it fast, because really, if you think about it, historically, they got about a 6 to 9 month window here to shove stuff through domestically, and then you're on to the midterms, and it's going to bog down really, really fast.
That is a fact, and we'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. You know, the big question is, why did Harris lose? And during the break, Louis and Virginia were discussing that more women voted for Biden than they voted for Harris. And Kamala, so much of her campaign were about women being disrespected, reproductive rights. But it really was not an issue to women, and I guess to a small cadre of people surrounding the vice president. What does this tell us? And also, while we're touching on Biden, I must tell you, I think deep in his soul, he wanted his vice president to lose. I don't think he did much to help her, and now they're sparring with each other, blaming Biden that he didn't drop out early enough as the reason why they lost. I mean, it's just amazing watching this blame game, Louis.
Well, jumping right with the blame game, I think it's interesting how the Harris campaign is saying that Biden should have stepped down earlier, but the Biden side can also say that his numbers were better in 2020. Like, Harris didn't overperform Biden any place in the entire country. And as Andrea was talking about the working class that moved towards Trump, Biden is widely known for his policies, or at least in legacy media, as the most pro-union president in history, and that didn't transfer to Harris. So I think I will go back to, I think the American electorate has proven that they're way more complex, and they're actually paying attention to the news and having an opinion about it, despite the misleading headlines that we often see. They're dissecting the information and making their choice, and it's a complex choice. More women voted for Biden than they did for Harris. We see at least more than 2 million people who voted for example, a abortion ballot to enshrine abortion rights, but voted for former President Donald Trump. So they did listen and believe that message that abortion rights should go to the states, and then they had a complex and diverse voting strategy. So I think all around, and going back to 2023, Biden in a poll in I think September, October was behind any generic Democrat. So Democrats have just not been reading the tea leaves. They've been sticking their heads in the ground, sticking to their strategy of identity politics, of threat to democracy, and the binary. I think yes, abortion helped them in 2022 midterms to stop that wave from coming, but they needed to move on from that message, and I think they also didn't move on from January 6th, and the American people do want to move on from the past 3.5 years, and that's what the elections showed.
Let me go quickly to you, Andrew. I noticed Zelensky has been calling President Trump, and Trump has been taking his calls. Even on Thursday of this week, they spoke for 20 minutes. I actually think that Trump, but at a far lesser level, will continue funding in Ukraine.
Hard to tell. He's been a little over the map on this. Rhetorically, he says one thing, but I think when he gets in office, he also understands that you can't look. Once one thing we know about Donald Trump, he doesn't want to look weak. And he intrinsically knows, even if he doesn't know all the ins and outs of foreign policy and frankly doesn't try to figure it all out sometimes, he knows he can't look weak with the Ukraine and Russia situation, and he wants to be an equal to Putin. He doesn't want to look weak to Putin. So even though he's talking about things that a lot of policy wonks are taking as he's just going to hand over Ukraine, and he may do it by accident, I don't know that he wants that perception. So I think you're right. I think he will try to get some kind of a settlement out of it. Some way, somehow, they're going to have to settle the Donbass in that region because Ukraine can't hold it and Russia ain't going to expand past it. So that's going to get on the table at some point. But I agree. I think under the table on the side, and again, Congress has got to fund this thing. Congress is very much more pro-Ukraine than Trump and the Trump camp are. There's still going to be funding. There's still going to be something to this. I think Zelensky senses it. I think the two of them are going to try to get some kind of a working relationship so that everybody at least gets something they want, because the one thing you don't want Ukraine is being a total disaster. And if you just hand it over, that's what you're going to have, and Trump's not going to want that on his name.
Virginia, it is obvious that Netanyahu, especially given the fact that he had to fire his defense minister, is very happy that Donald Trump has been reelected. Why is he happy? What does that do for Netanyahu and his agenda moving forward?
Well, he's happy because Trump is the most pro-Israel president that we've had in years. And you had years and years and years of American presidents saying, I'll move the embassy to Jerusalem, and Trump actually did it. So, not only do you have someone that's talked a big game, his actions have followed when it comes to supporting Israel. So I think Netanyahu recognized, or they spoke less than 24 hours after Trump was declared the winner. They spoke on the phone. I think that relationship has already been proven to be very strong. They had a good working relationship during the first administration, Trump's first administration. I think that's only going to continue. The big, yeah.
Go ahead. The big.
Well, I was going to say, I think the big factor for the American people is going to be, can you bring the 4 American hostages home? And they're going to want to see that quickly.
Why did so many Americans, especially Jewish Americans, did not believe that the vice president was pro-Israel and that she would cave in and eventually become more sympathetic to the pro-Palestinian movement?
You look at her record and you look at her history, it's an issue that was one of those sort of flip-floppy issues where it almost felt like she was speaking out of both sides of her mouth. And then you also look at her choice for vice president. She was very strategic about choosing Tim Walz because I think she felt like, all right, this is going to help me gain support in the Muslim community among Muslim voters. And you had this...
Because of his record as Minnesota governor.
Well, and being governor of Minnesota that has a large Muslim population. And so I think the American people saw that. I think they've seen lukewarm support from the Biden administration, where again, it's felt like, Biden has said, yes, we support Israel, but all of his actions haven't really followed that. And he's been very critical at times of Netanyahu. And again, that association between Harris and Biden, the American people really see them as synonymous. And so they thought, all right, well, we're going to get just more of what we've gotten, which is this very kind of mild, we'll back you, Israel, but we're not going to back you to the extent that really allows you to finish this and win the war.
Andrew, Virginia mentioned Tim Walz. Many people feel that was just a disaster of a selection.
Well, it could have been. VPs don't matter as much as we think they do. But yeah, she didn't get what she probably wanted or needed from him. Now, I'm probably in the minority. I think Josh Shapiro probably did the right thing by staying away from this ticket because I think he has a very bright future and he's done some good things. Some things I agree with, even though I disagree with him on a lot of ideology. I think he has a brighter future. He's probably smart to stay away from this ticket. So I know a lot of people were thinking that would matter. He wasn't going to save this ticket. He wasn't going to save those margins. He probably wouldn't have even brought Pennsylvania from what we're seeing. Walz hit very strangely to some people in social media and news media. And the thing with the vice presidential picks is they're very much a visual pick. They may not mean a lot electorally, but they do tend to kind of set a tone, and they do kind of make a visual representation of what you're trying to do. And he came off, frankly, as a little bit of a try-hard cheerleading rah-rah type a lot. And that's not really what fit the moment and fit this election when you came down to it. I understood the theory on paper, but when they actually put it on camera, it didn't translate the way I think they wanted it to. I don't think that's why she lost, but I sure don't think he helped her any at all here.
You know, what I'm going to do in the few minutes that we have left is let each of you just briefly talk about a topic that we've not talked about on this show that we may have overlooked in this election cycle, or going back to looking to another Trump presidency. Louis?
Thinking of the next month, what's going to happen in the next month and Congress, because we're all thinking about the 119th Congress and everything that Trump will be able to do with control of Congress. But before December 20th, we have a budget battle coming up. And I think that will be a very strong signal as to where Trump is going or how he's going to operate. Because there's a version where he could probably, whisper into Speaker Johnson's ear and say, like, just approve a government budget for 2025, and then we don't have to deal with it in my 101st days, my first 100 days in office. But there's another version where it's like torpedo it, do a CR, and then I want to approve my own budget in my own tailored to my own policy objectives. So I think that in this election cycle, we're all thinking about the results. Maybe we're thinking about the balance of power in the House right now, but I think that the budget battle of the 118th Congress will be the first signal of what's going to happen in 2025.
Virginia?
I want to talk a little bit about the people that Trump has and will surround himself with. This was such a unique election because of this coalition that formed around Trump. It was not a traditional Republican coalition, certainly, and really not even a traditional conservative coalition when you had folks like RFK and Elon Musk and your Joe Rogans going out and endorsing Trump. And then also, not only in Elon Musk's case, endorsing, actively campaigning, and then saying, I will volunteer my time to help
spend over $100 million.
Yeah, and then saying, if you are elected, I want to help get the out of control spending, speaking of spending, under control in Washington, D.C. I want to slash all the waste. And Trump saying, okay. So it's been really fascinating to see the people around him during the election. And then I think when he gets to the White House in January, it's going to be fascinating to see who are those cabinet positions. I think Vivek Ramaswamy is certainly guaranteed one. It's possible we'll see Pompeo back in some seat of authority. People have thrown around a number of other names, maybe from the previous administration. And I think we will likely see Elon Musk running around Washington, D.C. at some level.
He has to disclose.
He's not going to be in a cabinet position.
He has
Definitely
disclosed
not.
too much. He can't stop running his business. Elon is a businessman. Andrew.
Louis took the good one because this failure theater we're about to do is really either going to be the step up for the Trump administration or pulling the ladder out from him to going out the door. It's going to be very important. So let me jump ahead everybody else to the next election cycle, which, by the way, if you missed it, actually started 2 days ago already. Electoral politics, we talk about a lot of stuff. What we don't talk about and what the biggest thing is coalition building. Whatever else you think, the Republicans now have on paper and they have on the scoreboard a winning coalition, and they know what to go for, and they probably already have a candidate for 2028 and J.D. Vance sitting ready to go. They have a coalition. They have a diversifying coalition. They know what their coalition is. Our Democratic Party friends, not only do they not have a coalition, I don't think they even know what it needs to look like to be competitive in the next cycle, and they've got a bench problem right now, who their candidate's going to be. So in the future, for the next couple of years, we're going to talk about a lot of different things. When it comes to 2028 and the midterms to a little lesser extent, but especially 2028, Whoever builds a coalition is who wins elections. And the Republicans are way, way ahead in the coalition building for that election already, because they seem to have a formula now. They're going to have to figure out how to do it without Trump. But they've got one, and the Democratic Party, I'm not sure that they don't have to go clean back to the board and start from scratch to try to figure out what is the modern Democratic coalition to win a federal election. They're going to have to hash that out.
Well, listen, Andrew, Virginia, Louis, I can't thank you enough for joining us. When we come back, we're going to talk about inclusion with Dr. Jenna. You know, President Biden has reached out to the former President Donald Trump. He will be meeting with the former president next week at the White House. World leaders are reaching out. How do we heal the wounds that is so fractured in this nation and get under one accord? We'll be joined by Dr. Jenna on this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Don't you touch that dial, because we're coming back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, it's so important that we find our better angels and we find the things that we have in common, because in any presidential election there will be those that's going to be ecstatic over the winner and those that are going to be sad over the loser. And I know people like to say, because they won, that God blessed them and God's hand was in this. But you know, I believe God's hand is in all things, but he also gives us free will, which is why we invited Dr. Jenna, who's the founder and director of the Meditation Museum, an inclusionist who brings people together. She's a well-known spiritual mentor, to join us today. How do you know, I thought it was very important that President Biden immediately reached out to former President Donald Trump and invited him to the White House. I thought it was equally important that Vice President Harris, through all this sadness and pain, she urged her supporters to get behind the president. She wanted him to succeed, as well as what former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton said. Why is that important in times like these, that no matter what you wish for during these elections, whatever the results are, you have to unify?
I think that's the natural nature of our spirit. I think if you really listen to your soul will always tell you what's right. And that right is usually an energy that won't give sorrow to people or take sorrow from people. And it's just innate. If your child is being a bully or being very harsh with the next door neighbor, you'll say, John, don't do that. Come on, just be respectful and nice to them. And so it's the same thing for all of us. We all have that quality inside.
What do you say when it's just so dark, particularly the people who still suffer through Hurricane Milton and the devastation, and they've lost their way of life, family members they cannot find? How do you help people see the possible good that can help them believe that they can build a better life?
You know, until you walk in someone's shoe, you cannot understand the pain of that individual. And when you're going through an immense amount of suffering and sorrow, sometimes you just need to sit next to them quietly. Quietly.
Explain that a little more. Silence.
If you had lost somebody that you loved tremendously, how can I even begin to understand the enormous pain and trauma of loss that you're feeling? And there are times in which, in those moments of despair, your presence, to care, to just be there, to put your hand on someone's back, knowing that words cannot really help at that time, but God's love through you will be a great healer. And I think right now the country on both sides of the spectrum there is a healing. I love what Donald Trump said in his acceptance speech, that we do need to heal. Heal at a soul level, not at a political level. You know, you and I both know that if you've ever been unkind to somebody, when you're very quiet and peaceful inside, it pinches at your conscience. And why people don't like silence is that they don't want to hear their conscience. And why meditation is so important, it cleans your conscience. And when your conscience is clean, you can feel the energy of the divine through you and in you. And so if you're suffering, brother, I would just sit next to you. And if you feel like talking, then I will listen and I will talk back. But if we've got too much information and things that we don't know, is this real, is this not real, is it right, I have to compete with my right over your right, you'll never be able to help another child of God.
You know, as we speak now, there's someone who's being raped.
Oh, yeah.
Some child's being neglected. Someone is being killed, vandalized, a place is looted. Somebody's on the battlefield of war and conflict.
Yeah, couples right now are fighting.
Fighting each
There's
other.
There's an abuse in a marriage.
Abuse in marriage.
Infidelity in a marriage.
Domestic violence, wife beating. What do you say to those right now who may be watching this broadcast, who bring pain to others?
Okay, let me first explain that when you're in such a state that you cannot feel the empathy of another child of God, you're in a very human dimension. And let me explain what I mean by human. There's an acronym that I use, ALGE. Can you remember that one? A for anger, L for lust, G for greed, A for attachment, E for ego. If you and I sit here and the motives in my thoughts are influenced by any of these personalities that are recorded in me, I reach a point, Armstrong, I get numb. And I become so human that I stop thinking about the way you would feel by the way I look at you or the way I speak at you. I become so self-centered, so focused on what's in it for me. And even if I see you suffering, that suffering is also a kind of a mirror of my own suffering, and where I don't have anyone to talk to. I have nobody to share my suffering and my pain, especially if I've inherited it from a child. So for me to tell somebody and I've worked with child traffickers, I've been with mass murderers, I've dealt with people in prisons, I've been with people who have stolen money from people who have loved, the nicest people, the sweetest people, they're all God's child. Some are traumatized in one way or the other. But the ones that are so indoctrinated with, I'm going to use this again, the giving of sorrow, those souls that are giving sorrow, it is a sign of the depth of the algae in their personality. And when they see the purity of a child, it's a desire that they have to regain it. And unfortunately, because there's so much into the pain and the suffering, the abuse ensures. And now I'm talking about some deep spiritual things here. But Armstrong, when you are on your knees, and if everything has been taken away from you, and the only thing left is your spirit and your soul, you are left with the content of your character. That is your truth. And I feel that this time, and that's what makes this election so powerful, is that it's giving us a chance to really look inside of ourselves and find who we have become as people, but deeply who we are. I was in Paris just a few days ago for the Olympics, and I did a beautiful fashion show. And my fashion show was called Illuminating the Light Within for the African Olympians. And I did this gala. You know what my fashion show was? I featured all the religions throughout time. And the garb that the religions wear were to remind you and me of the light that's within us. And at the end of the fashion show, I did a narrative that basically said, if you look at all the faiths that have walked through the runway, look at their garbs. Whatever you belong to, you're supposed to remember the light within you. God hasn't squeezed himself in one of these religions. He hasn't squeezed himself in a religion. He belongs to us all. And when you think of this energy of beauty and power and grace, Armstrong, if all of us had this connection to the divine, there'd be peace.
Why is it, though, that people struggle
Because of the algae.
to find the light?
Algae.
You know, it's, you know, I say often that we're in a spiritual depression.
I like that.
And that
I love that.
people need to reconnect to morality and what's good. What kind of a role does social media and media play in the darkness of people?
It depends on what you get attracted to. Some people are attracted to porno and social media. I'm not. Some people are attracted to inspiring things, recipes. I am.
Is it because their souls are restless and they're in search for something to fulfill them?
I think there isn't guidance. There aren't enough positive, inspiring figures in their lives to give them the opportunity to say, live this way. I guarantee you, you're going to prevail. You're going to contribute. You look at all the prophets. They've been crucified because they came to teach good. They never spoke bad about people. They spoke good about people. They taught, look, every scripture has taught you to love.
And are you telling us that there is a demonic force among us who doesn't want people teaching the good and finding the better in ourselves? They want to live in darkness, and it's such a place of misery.
I'm saying that in the 8 billion souls that are on the planet, we're all struggling with algae. And if we...
Well, let's just say this. Some are struggling with it much more.
Let's just say that a little bit less than 8 billion souls of us are all struggling with this algae that's recorded in the personality. And how do you remove it? Maybe if you met me, maybe you felt loved. Maybe you felt peace. Here, let me finish.
And maybe if and maybe if you watch us, you felt love.
Maybe somebody's
Yes,
feeling the love now.
yes.
So if we can have more examples of lives that are lived with a sense of significance and importance and essence of spirit, you can run your company. Look, my organization, 9,000 branches.
You know, I've got 45 seconds left, and it's important for people to see how they can find out more information about you.
My organization, 9,000 branches in 110 countries, 1 million volunteers. That's not easy to run.
But you can.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because I keep my peace.
Yes. And I feel your peace. And
Thank you.
Yes, I do.
And this is what I'd like to tell everybody out there. You can change your environment and your world if you keep focusing on the importance of your peace within you, because without it, you're not going to be happy even if you get what you're looking for.
Listen, I cannot, and you're a good closer too. Let me thank Andrew, Virginia, Louis for joining us. I really enjoy talking to you. We're going to have you back on because you need more time.
I think so.
Yes, I know so. Okay. And thank you so much for joining us for this Saturday edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. And build on what she says, finding light in your darkness. Good day, everybody.